Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we are going to talk about manipulation. And we're going to start out with a little bit of a philosophical idea with manipulation. So it's this question that I kind of posed when we first talked about this topic. Does it have to have a negative connotation to be considered manipulative? So we know, for instance, that manipulation can be a scientific or a mathematical term, right? So in experiments, the manipulative is factors in an experiment that can be changed. So there's physical manipulation, but then there's also emotional manipulation. And I feel like they're definitely separate. So when it comes to emotional manipulation, does it have to, or I guess cognitive, we'll maybe call it cognitive manipulation, does it have to have a negative connotation in order to be considered manipulation?
Well, I'm curious what you think about it, because I know what my answer is. I'm pretty set on my answer.
And I think I know what your answer is going to be, but I don't know. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because I don't know. I mean, because you think about it, how manipulative are car salesmen?
Well, okay, so let's use that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to say yes, that it's always negative. And here's the reason why. I think there's a reason, because there's a lack of honesty in manipulation. And so I think in any relationship, and you and I often talk about, intimate relationships and family relationships. Well, let's take the car salesman. Like, how many people, I mean, I don't know the statistics on this, but I don't like, that's one of the worst things in the world for me.
Yeah.
Is to go buy a new car. Unfortunately, you don't do it very often. But and what I hate about it is the dishonesty. And so there was who did this? I think it was Saturn, which I don't even think they make cars anymore. That was, one of the big car companies. But I think what they did is they tried to change that. And when you went in, I don't even know if they had salesmen in the same way, but like their prices were set. There was none of the hidden stuff.
Okay.
And I think they were trying to get away from that perception, although I think it's a pretty accurate perception.
Yeah.
Are dishonest and they're hiding things. So going back to why I think manipulation in any form is bad or has that negative connotation, I think it's because there's dishonesty involved.
Okay.
And so if we move then to intimate relationships, I mean, I've said this many times before on episodes, you have to be honest. You have to be honest with your partner. You have to be honest with your children. And even when it's uncomfortable for you to be honest, I think that old saying, sometimes they make sense. Honesty is the best policy.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
Okay. Yeah. And so, because I was thinking of it too in terms of, any sort of selling feels it almost feels like a form of manipulation. But is it still manipulation if you believe in it?
Well, but wouldn't you rather, like, if you're buying something, it doesn't matter what it is, rather have total honesty?
Yes.
So if we go back to, people trying to sell you things, now I realize that there's going to be dishonesty, but I think, you talked about a philosophical argument about this. I would prefer that people would be honest. I think then you can make informed choices.
Yeah, and that I agree with. And I certainly know people who sell products or services that they very firmly believe in, right? And so I guess, I don't know, I think there's all sorts of ways to manipulate things. Some of them are okay, some of them are dishonest. So another form of maybe dishonest manipulation I can think of is when someone is selling a product, particularly surrounding like something you wear or like weight loss, and they manipulate camera angles or they manipulate the editing to make someone appear more or less than what they are. And you see that all the time in this world. And I think, that's a form of manipulation, and it works because it's a problem in today's society, right?
Well, social media, if you think about social media, you think I don't even know what TikTok is, but TikTok or Instagram, I guess. people post pictures of themselves and they're almost always altered in some way. And
Yeah.
so that certainly is manipulation, and it has that component of dishonesty.
Yeah. And so this leads pretty well into another thing that we were going to bring up, and that's manipulation on a global or even a national scale, which again, I mean, is definitely a problem. And yet, in some ways, it's socially acceptable. So, one thing that I'm thinking of, and we don't get political, but this is just for the sake of the conversation. So, I'm thinking of elections.
Oh, right. Hmm.
And I mean, how much manipulation goes into an election? And you think of the way the media, in fact, I think media is the got to be the biggest form of manipulation because the media controls the information and they can spin it however they want. That's seriously manipulating.
Right. And so I think, you and I, we do try and stay away from politics, but I think you and I can agree that, say, both major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, do the same thing. It's
Yes,
not
they
like
do.
it's
Yeah.
not like one is doing it and one is not. And so
Mhm.
you're absolutely right that manipulation on a global scale, but I think it's also governments certainly manipulate information in order to get a certain reaction
Yes.
out of people. So here's one. So if you go back to 9/11
Mhm.
in our country, and it was a terrible, terrible thing that happened. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can agree that the government at the time then used that as a way to get more control over
Okay.
people. The way we fly changed. There are so many different things, and I think they called it there was some Freedom Act or something.
Yeah.
But what happens is you take a global event, which is terrible, and then you shift it slightly, and it's the way you portray it. And what happened is we need more control over your lives. Essentially, is
Mhm.
is what happened with that.
And, a lot of people could argue that the same thing, and I don't know if I'm not going to say if they're right or wrong, but a lot of people would argue that same thing happened with COVID,
Oh, I think, yeah. Well, yes, I think that's certainly true. I think maybe we can all agree on the information we got. Who knows what? I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know if it was accurate or not.
Right.
We lost faith in like the CDC. I mean, the CDC
Yeah.
was fumbling around, and so I think you're right that there was some manipulation going on there.
Yeah. And there are certain things that we can all agree on. We can all agree that COVID was dangerous. It was terrible.
Terrible.
A
Yeah.
lot of people lost their lives and that was devastating. And it was hard and it was sad. We can all agree on those things. But, I like what you said about the information. I think the information was very much manipulated. One thing that bothers me the most is probably the fact that people in my age group, so people who are young and healthy, they had very, very little reason to ever be scared of getting COVID. I mean, yes, there was a chance that they could get it and get seriously ill or die, but they had a much higher risk of dying in a car accident. And it's
Hmm.
not that we didn't need to take precautions. I don't want people to come across thinking that I'm in the anti-COVID camp or right because I mean we try really hard to stay away from politics. And I also don't want to mitigate anyone's fears of COVID because for a lot of people there was a lot of reason to be concerned.
Right.
And we did need to do something like COVID was real, it was a thing, and we did need to react to it.
Well, it goes back to, we can call it misinformation, but in the end,
Yeah.
it's dishonesty. And so
Mhm.
that's why, circling back to the start of the episode, is that's why I believe manipulation is bad. It's
Mhm.
that I think whether we're buying a car or whether we're trying to make a decision on our health care, I think
Mhm.
we deserve to have the best information that we can. And I don't think that happens sometimes. I hope I hope it does happen occasionally, but
Yeah.
I've lost a lot of faith in the information that we get. I think you need to figure it out on your own, which is problematic too. Anyway, so that's, yeah, from a global scale, I think that governments deal in misinformation all
Mhm.
the time. And I don't think it matters in our country if you're Republican or if you're Democrat. I think it's somehow, for whatever reason, it's what government does, which I
Mhm. Yeah, and so a lot of people know that politics is it's my side hobby. I love politics and I love following politics. And one thing that's very important to me is listening to both sides. And so I pick people who are on very much obviously on the left, and I pick people who are very much on the right. And I listen to them both because it's important to me to get both sides. In fact, when I tell people the regular political podcasts that I listen to daily, they're like, wait, what? And it confuses them because they're polar opposites. But I do that because I know how much information is manipulated. And I feel like I can help tease out the truth by listening to polar opposite sides.
Well, I mean, you get both sides, but you do realize that from whatever, side you're listening to, some of that information is going to be false.
Yes.
That I think is so sad, is
Yeah.
that we
Hmm.
can't count on people just being honest nowadays. So anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, global perspective, I think it's a big problem.
Yeah. Well, and think of pharmaceuticals. So back to
Oh
that.
my gosh, don't get me started on pharmaceuticals. That's one of the things I get on my soapbox about.
Right, but it's a problem. I mean, think back to that study that we just talked about in brain
Uh-huh.
research a couple of months
Yeah,
ago.
yeah,
That's a serious problem. I mean, and even that Alzheimer's research, he
uh-huh.
manipulated it in a very
Yeah,
dishonest
I'm
way.
right. He lied about it.
Yeah.
But see, I think you always have to be suspect when there's money involved.
Yes.
Again, if you go back to car sales, there's a lot of money involved. The guy wants to make a commission. Drugs, what a huge business. I mean, how many billions and billions of dollars a year? And certainly we talked about, the antidepressants, things like that.
Yeah.
I think it's not just those drugs. I mean, it
No.
could be any drugs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's hard to discern what's truth. And I think you're right. It's all about manipulation.
So there's one more thing that I want to talk about, maybe to kind of get your opinion on a little bit, because this one is also political, but I think it's really interesting in terms of talking about manipulation from a philosophical standpoint, and that is the 2016 election and the whole Hillary Clinton's email scandal
Oh,
and
right,
Russian disinformation.
right.
So the timing was very manipulative. So, just weeks before the election, Russia comes out, and I believe Russia was somehow involved with this huge scandal involving Hillary Clinton's email. And a lot of people think it lost her the election.
Hmm.
That's
Well, yeah,
manipulation.
yeah, there was that. And then the FBI guy, Comey, came out and made some statement. I think that was pretty damaging. But you're right that in elections, there's so much disinformation, and
Yeah.
the way we let information out. I think the same thing's happening now in a lot of ways because we're coming up to a midterm election, and so
Hmm.
information get put out there, the timing, how it's framed. For me, it's pretty discouraging. I try and like you really like to jump into the politics and listen.
Hmm.
Drives me crazy. I stay away from it
Yeah.
because I don't trust it from
Hmm.
either side. I just don't trust it. And so I try and live my little life here in, the neighborhood and in Salt Lake
Yeah.
and
Yep.
doing my work and trying to help couples and individuals. And I try and insulate myself from the other stuff.
Yeah. And I get that. And I get why people do that. And I guess for me, it's important for me to make an informed decision when it comes to voting, because I mean it is a big deal. This is our country and this is where we live, and I care about it. And so it's important to me to make informed decisions. But I get why people feel overwhelmed. I mean, because it took me at least a year and a half, maybe even two, probably more like 2 years to really find my niche in the
Mhm.
political realm of, okay, what's fact, what's just opinion? Because that's another thing too that you have to differentiate in the realm of politics is fact versus opinion. And it's subtle. It's so subtle.
I
But,
don't know how you determine facts in the political
mhm.
realm. I think that's really, really difficult to do.
It is. It is. And it's so hard. But, over the years I've gotten good at realizing, okay, this side is exaggerating this and this side is exaggerating that. And I've been able to kind of tease out a little bit of the truth. I've at least been able to make my own informed opinion. And I think that's a big safeguard in manipulation is looking at it from different aspects. Now, sometimes manipulation is obvious, and that's what we're going to get to next. But
Yeah.
sometimes manipulation can be more subtle. So, I mean, and I think on a global scale, when it comes to politics or even pharmaceuticals, the manipulation is hard to detect. and you have to really tease it out. But sometimes manipulation is just blatantly obvious.
So I think that, bringing up subtle manipulation on a global level, I think that's a pretty good segue into what does this look like in interpersonal relationships?
Yes.
And so the thing that I want before we, jump into that is that I think there are two groups of people who are manipulative. And I think on the one hand, we have talked in the past about personality disorders. So if you
Hmm.
think about antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic, and then the other one I think is borderline personality disorder. And I think all three of those have as a component manipulation.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to realize there's that group. And then I think there's another group where I was going to use the word, is it more innocent? I don't know if it's innocent, but I think they're unaware of it. And I think that there is a group that probably thinks, okay, I'm right. It could be my way is the right way. And because I treat couples all the time where one of them thinks their way is the right way. And I don't think they're manipulative. I think they're just
Hmm.
misinformed and generally lack empathy. And I think if as we've talked in the past, just because you lack empathy doesn't mean you're necessarily narcissistic or antisocial or
Yeah.
sociopath, that, there are varying degrees of that. And so I think that there's a group where, yes, they might lack empathy and understanding of their behavior, but I put them in a different category. And I don't know if I was clear on that. Does that make sense to you that I think there are different categories of people who are manipulative?
Yeah, and I think you're right. So I think it kind of goes back to this idea that we've talked about before of truth is in the eyes of the beholder. So,
Tell me what you mean by that.
so truth is in the eyes of the beholder. It's kind of like truth can mean different things to different people.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And this is an example I've used before is, I'm looking at your walls, Mark, in your house, and I say your walls are green. Well,
Hmm.
someone might say, well, no, they're this shade of green, and they'll give a specific color. Well, which one is right?
Hmm.
Or, it could just be a perception of the light. They could be blues, right? But that happens a lot is somebody will see something and their perception of it is going to be completely different.
Right.
And so I think it kind of just depends on intent, I guess is what I'm getting at. I think when it comes to manipulation and manipulative people, intent really matters. Are you trying to be deceitful? Are you trying to be honest? Are you trying to sway something for some nefarious purpose? Or are you just trying to convince somebody of something? I mean, Curtis
Right.
loves persuading people and talking people into things that he likes, something that he's passionate about. He loves talking people onto his side,
Yeah,
but
but
I
I'll
don't
bet
think
he's
he's
honest.
manipulative.
I'll
Yeah,
bet he's honest, though. See,
exactly.
so those are two pretty good words to look at: persuasion
Mhm.
and manipulation. And so
Yeah.
persuasion, see, I think the difference is that you're going to be honest about it,
Yeah. Okay,
whatever it
that
is. And so
mhm.
I don't think there's anything negative about that if you believe
Mhm.
passionately about something. Whereas manipulative, then I think you're going to include some dishonesty in it.
I like that. Yeah. I think that's a really good point to make in terms of is it considered manipulative? I think it's all about intent.
Yeah. So here's where I was going with that, the segue, if we compare like interpersonal relationships and then even governments or, on the global level, I think it's about behavior. So if you look at,
Okay.
so you can listen to words or you can look at the behavior.
Mhm.
And again, I'm bringing up these old sayings, behavior is more important than words. What you
Yeah.
do is more important than what you say. And I really think that's true, both on like a global level and then on an interpersonal level. So
Mhm.
if you're in a relationship with someone who you feel is manipulative, I think it's really hard because they're going to be, I think you said this at the start, that they can be charismatic or charming,
Yes.
which is certainly true. And so they're really good at convincing you that they have your best interest at heart. But if you look at their behavior, then their behavior often is not the same as their words.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that we need to pay more attention to. I think both on a global level and on an interpersonal level is what is the outcome? What's really happening?
Yeah, which is a really good way to put it because, there are definitely people in this world who they want something from you. and
Yes.
that's it. That's all they want is they want something. They're looking for some benefit. And then there are also people who just want to be kind,
Mhm.
right? And I don't think that it's possible to distinguish that at first. I think it can be pretty hard to know, to tell right off the bat, is this person manipulative? And maybe that's what makes politics so hard is we don't see these people's personal interactions. We don't see what they do on a daily basis. We
Right.
only see this very small portion of their lives that's on camera.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
it's a little sound bite. And there, yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And, I think that social media has been huge in terms of manipulation on a global scale.
Oh, yeah.
Uh,
Well, that's what that book that I mentioned last week, The Chaos Machine, is
yeah,
really.
yeah.
And so, we'll put up a reference to that, but it's definitely about how social media has played a part in that manipulation, because you're exactly right. But the thing, and we'll get off this in a minute, but it's about AI. So that artificial intelligence,
Yeah,
which I think I've mentioned before, but it's not like there are these people behind the curtain,
right.
Facebook, or
Hmm.
who are manipulated. It's not that at all. It's that these programs, the artificial intelligence has been created that does that, that
Yeah.
does manipulation. So I think that there's one word, this is one of my favorite words. If people hear me on the radio, they'll hear me talk about this all the time in relationships, and that's boundaries.
Yes.
Typically, people who are manipulative do not have good boundaries. And
Okay.
so, I mean, it could be they're intruding on your personal space, on your emotional space. They come in and it feels almost like they're taking over, part of your world or your life. And so I think that's all about boundaries.
Hmm.
So if you're thinking about, well, what do you do? So if you're in a relationship with someone who's manipulative, whether it's a partner or maybe it's just a friend or even a work colleague,
Hmm.
and that you feel like is manipulating you, then I think it's about boundaries. And it again, you're looking at behavior. And one thing with boundaries is, like, if you and I are discussing something and you say, well, Mark, would you do this? And I say, no, I'm not going to do it. In a
Hmm.
typical relationship, you would hear my no and
Yeah.
it would be okay. But people who are manipulative don't hear the no,
Mm.
or it doesn't matter to them,
Okay.
So to me, that's a boundary. And so if you're trying to change your interaction with someone who's manipulative, you've got to really learn how to say no well
Okay.
and how to stick to it.
Hmm.
Because often people who are manipulative, and I think this can be people in either of those two groups that I mentioned earlier, I think they can be somewhat relentless in trying to wear you down,
Hmm.
because no is not the word they want to hear,
Yeah.
but no is the word that you've got to stick to. And that's a boundary for, I think.
I agree. And I think the hardest part is with these manipulative people, I think they genuinely believe that what they have to say or what they want you to do, they believe that it's in your best interest.
I think that, yes, and that's harder for me with the personality disorder group.
Yeah.
And it's confusing, but I think you're right. It's just that other group that I think, not personality disorder. I think that's absolutely true, because they really believe that it's in your best interest. And they truly believe that whatever they want is the right way or it's the right thing.
Mm.
But again, I think the boundaries. So if you go back to, in previous episodes, I think we've talked about personality disorders, and I think we've talked about borderline personality disorder. Really, the only way, actually, I think with all of them, one of the few things you can do is to set good boundaries.
Hmm.
And, I mean, that's really all you have, is
Yes.
to set those good boundaries. And so I think that people need to learn how to do that, because we listen to the words. This goes back to, do you look at the behavior or do you listen to the words? And I think you have to really be introspective enough to think, how am I feeling in the presence of this other person? And I think sometimes we
Yeah.
feel manipulated, or we feel like they don't hear us, or we feel like our thoughts and feelings are not taken into account. by this other person. I think that's a big indicator that you're probably feeling manipulative because if you think of your relationship, say with Curtis or mine with Lindy, it's a true back and forth.
Yeah,
It feels reciprocal. And so one of the ways that you might know that your relationship is not that you're in a manipulative relationship is it doesn't feel reciprocal. So, we're talking about boundaries, but here's another thing that I think is really important to help people, and that is that the person who's manipulative is going to want to engage you to try and convince you. You know,
okay.
and we were talking about persuasion earlier. It looked like persuasion, but I still think it's manipulation because
Yeah.
there's not honesty involved. But I think that it's a losing battle to engage with them. I think
Hmm.
we need to know when is it appropriate to engage or have a discussion. So again, you and I can have discussions
Yes.
and we see things very differently.
Hmm.
And there may even, I don't know that I've ever felt persuasion, but it's just these thoughts going back and forth. But we don't engage if it's not going to be productive.
Yes.
And so I think that, again, if you're with someone who's manipulative, you aren't going to change their mind.
Yeah.
So I don't see why waste the time or energy or the psychic energy to engage with them because I think their goal, a manipulative person's goal, is just to wear you down.
Probably. And I'm thinking of this in terms of, maybe like people who have strong feelings, and people have strong feelings about politics and religion. Definitely. And Mark, we've talked about politics and religion before,
Right.
and we've shared opinions and beliefs and been able to listen and respect the other person's opinion,
Right.
right? And validate it even if we don't agree. So I feel like if someone who is manipulative, they will keep pushing.
They don't do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're
They
right.
they'll keep pushing you, and they'll keep saying no, but I'm right, but look at all these facts, well, look at
Mhm.
these facts,
Yeah.
and that's not helpful. So
No.
I think it is good to talk to people who think differently than you. In fact, I love talking to people who differ with me politically because I love hearing what they think, and I love to be able to express my opinions well, and I love to be able to hear other people express their opinions. But you have to, like you said, set that boundary and draw a line, right?
Right.
And not allow yourself to just be so easily swayed.
Right, but also disengage is
Yeah.
that's the thing I want to get out there. You don't have to stay and engage. You can say because I think often manipulative people, I was trying to think how to describe this. It almost feels like they're taking over the space, both emotional and physical, and
Yeah.
you become smothered. And if you ever start to feel that, then retreat and set the boundary and stop engaging because it's not going to be fruitful. It's just going to be frustrating.
Yeah.
And so I think those are two things that people can do if they're involved in a manipulative relationship is one, three things. Look at behavior
Yes.
as opposed to the words,
Hmm.
set good boundaries, and then don't engage
Yeah.
because it's not going to do any good to engage. But I think that's also a boundary. It's just a different type of boundary. But no means no,
Hmm.
and stick to it. I think those are three good things to help people who feel like they might be in manipulative relationships.
So let's talk for a minute, kind of to wrap things up. Manipulation among youth, or more particularly peer pressure. Is peer pressure a form of manipulation?
See,
So,
I see that differently. I don't.
okay,
Do you see it differently? Because is there dishonesty involved? I don't.
that's a
Hmm.
good point. So here's an example that I am thinking of. You're at a party and someone starts taking drinks and there's drinking
Mhm.
involved, and
Mhm.
you've already decided for yourself that you're not going to drink. But people keep saying, no, no, go ahead, just take a drink anyways, just take a drink anyways. Everyone at once is trying to get this person to give in. Is that manipulation, or is that just peer pressure? I mean, what's the difference?
Well, it's a really good question, Liz. I would call it peer pressure.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think that, see, I don't know that there's dishonesty involved because I would
Okay.
guess a group of people, I've never experienced this, so I'm just making a guess here.
Hmm.
That the group of, say, teenagers who are trying to get the other person to drink. They like the feeling of drinking, and they like whatever it is that's happening when you're drinking and the social aspect of it. I
Okay.
just really like that. I don't think there's anything nefarious about, I don't know if that's the right word, or malicious about it. I don't
Yeah,
think
I
I
think
don't think there's
Malaysian.
any malicious intent. I
Okay.
think it's the intent to get the person to, hey, we're having fun here, and this is the way we're having fun. We want you to have fun with us.
Okay.
Uh, I think it's peer pressure.
I agree. And I like that because, I mean, there can also be positive peer pressure. Like, hey,
Right.
we're all doing this fundraiser. Will you join us?
Right. It's just, yeah.
That's,
And so I think, as I said that, it made more sense that there's no malicious intent
yeah.
typically.
Okay.
Um,
So
yeah,
I think going back to our original philosophical question, does there have to be a negative connotation in order for it to be manipulative? I think yes.
yeah, yeah, I think so too, because there's ill intent and there's dishonesty. And I just don't think there's any place for dishonesty in relationships.
Yeah, I agree completely. Okay, so next week, we're going to talk about disabilities, and we want to frame this from how to treat people who have disabilities, from obvious physical disabilities to the more subtle mental disabilities. And, how do you interact? Also, because it is Dwarfism Awareness Month in October. And so we want to discuss, how do you treat people who look differently than you?
Good topic.
Yeah. All right, everyone. We'll see y'all next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.